Introduction. Moments like these quiet beginnings that grow into extraordinary destinies are at the heart of bedtime tales. Stories that drift gently into your imagination, carrying you far enough to wonder, but softly enough to rest. And this one, like every story told here, is not just about myths or legends, but about peace, stillness, and the feeling of being carried safely into the world of dreams. And before we begin this journey together tonight, I invite you to make this place a part of your nightly ritual. Subscribe to Sleeping Therapy by Emma, so that each evening, whenever you're ready to slip into rest, you'll have a story waiting. Whether it's the tale of a wandering traveler, the legend of a hidden child, or the sigh of the stars themselves. Now settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let us step quietly into the shadows of that ancient cave where a baby waits to grow into the god of gods. Chapter 1 of the story is The Hidden Child. Tonight, we begin not with thunder, nor with lightning, nor with the mighty roar of a grown god, but with the softest of sounds, a newborn baby's cry. Faint, uncertain, fluttering like the wings of a moth in the dark. And yet, this single cry belonged to a child who would, in time, command the very heavens. Before the towering halls of Olympus were raised, before crowns and kingdoms of gods, there was only fear, prophecy, and the quiet determination of a mother. To understand Zeus, the one who would hurl thunderbolts from the skies, we must return to the very beginning, where he was small enough to be wrapped in a cloth, hidden away in a cave. The story begins with his parents, Cronus and Rhea. Cronus, a titan who reigned after toppling his own father, was convinced of his unshakable rule. Yet even he could not silence the whisper of prophecy. He had heard it spoken by Gaia, the earth, and by Uranus, the sky he had dethroned. One of Cronus' own children would rise up and overthrow him. The curse of succession passed down like a shadow over each generation. Imagine his fear wrapped up in pride. A king glancing at his infants not with love, but with suspicion. And so, one by one, as each child emerged into the world, Cronus performed the most terrible act imaginable. He swallowed them whole. Hestia went first, her warmth extinguished before it could kindle. Then Demeter, leafy and bright. Then Hera, whose queenly spirit was smothered before it had time to sing. Hades, drawn down into the keeping of his father's body. Then Poseidon, whose great power of sea and storm lay silent in Cronus's belly. 5 children gone consumed not for nourishment, but for fear. Their cries unheard, their future stolen. And the mother, Rhea. Oh, her suffering was beyond words. Imagine her arms, empty again and again. Her heart broke each time she birthed a child, only to watch Cronus snatch it away. Anguish lived in her eyes. Despair carved lines into her soul. Her grief was heavy not only as a mother, but as a titaness, a being of great strength who, for all her power, could not protect her own. Yet when she was due to deliver her 6th child, something inside her changed. Grief hardened into resolve. She would not allow this one to be devoured by fear. She would fight prophecy not with violence, but with secrecy. And so it was that Rhea left in secret, guided by the whispering voice of Gaia. Across sea and land she went, her steps cloaked in moonlight, until she reached the wild island of Crete. There the mountains rose proud and untamed, their slopes thick with pine and stone, their peaks scratched by stars. On the side of Mount Ida, in the embrace of rock and shadow, she found a cave. Dark, silent, protective. There in that cavern, Rhea gave birth to her son. The air was still, and the walls glistened with damp stone. The baby's voice carried through the narrow chamber, fragile but insistent. She kissed him again and again, her tears falling onto his small cheeks. She named him Zeus. In that moment, she was no longer a broken mother. She was a shield. But keeping Zeus safe would require help. And so Gaia, the great earth, sent guardians, the Curetes, bronze-clad warriors strong as mountains, who danced and clashed their spears and shields when the baby cried. No gentle lullabies from them, rather, a noise so loud, so fierce, that it drowned the infant's voice and tricked Cronus into thinking all was quiet. Each clang of metal was a promise. No cry will escape the cave, no danger shall approach. And beside them was Amalthea, Zeus's nurse. Some say she was a nymph, graceful and tender. Others say a divine goat, ageless and nourishing. Either way, her role was one of love. She fed the child with milk rich as cream, sweet as blossom. She sheltered him with her warmth. In time, her horn, the horn of Amalthea, would spill an endless cornucopia of abundance, a blessing born of her gentle care. So the baby grew, hidden amid clashing songs of bronze and the quiet drip of cave water. Imagine the days, silvery dawn slipping through cracks in the rock, shadows creeping and retreating as the sun moved overhead. Imagine the nights, stars stretched wide, moonlight creeping across the cave floor, while the Kirites kept watch, fierce and tireless, and in the center, swaddled in soft cloth, Zeus slept. His tiny breaths puffed little clouds into the cool air. His hands, no bigger than a pebble, curled and uncurled, reaching for the world he would one day command. Even then, there was a spark in him. Those who looked upon the infant spoke of a strange glimmer in his eyes, a brightness that lingered like hidden lightning, waiting for its storm. But what makes this story soothing, even now, is how gently fate worked. It didn't roar or rush. It whispered day after day, nurturing Zeus's life in secret. Sometimes destinies unfold not with a shout, but with a long, steady silence. And Zeus's destiny, mighty as it was, began with the hush of a cave and the rhythm of protectors guarding his sleep. Meanwhile, Cronus still ruled the world. He sat on his throne, smug and content, believing he had swallowed every rival before they could rise. He was a king in denial, devouring what he feared, but blind to what grew in the shadows he'd overlooked. Fate has a way of laughing softly at kings like him. For every tear Rhea had shed, there was now a spark of hope in her heart. She visited the cave when she could, weeping with relief as she held Zeus in her arms before leaving him again in secrecy. Each goodbye carved another mark on her soul, but each reunion was a promise renewed. This child would live, and through him, all that had been lost would be restored. Picture the baby again in that cradle of stone, with the Kirites dancing outside, their bronze armor flashing like fire in the night. Picture Amalthea leaning close, her warmth a shield, her milk a gift. Picture the cave as a womb of destiny, sheltering the future god of thunder as he dreamed softly in his innocence. No thunder yet, no lightning, not even a storm on the horizon. Just a baby tucked safely in shadows, with the whole vast power of Olympus waiting quietly within him, as if asleep. And so his story begins not in power, but in fragility. Not in triumph, but in the courage of one mother's refusal to surrender her child. This is how the greatest of gods entered the world, not with a roar, but with a whisper. And in that whisper, myth itself took its first breath. The cave on Mount Ida was not grand. It had no columns of marble, no carved statues, no sweeping staircases lined with gold. Its ceiling hung low, its edges damp with dripping water, its stones cool and rough. And yet, within that simple shelter, more destiny stirred than in the richest palaces of the world. Day by day, the cave became Zeus's cradle, rocking him from fragile infancy into a childhood marked by secrecy, care, and quiet wonder. The mornings came first with a gradual glow, light creeping through small cracks and doorways in the stone, spreading itself across the walls like liquid gold. The boy's breaths were steady in those moments, sometimes accompanied by a soft murmur, as if he were already dreaming even in waking hours. Amalthea, ever close, fed and comforted him. Her horns glimmered faintly in the slanting sunlight, symbols of nourishment unending, a promise that this child would not hunger, no matter how long he stayed hidden from the eyes of the world. The curates, his guardians, were tireless. Bronze gleamed across their bodies, weapons clashed in rhythm, boots stamped against the rocky ground in patterns almost ritual-like. To any who might wander near, the noise would sound like an otherworldly storm, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. But for Zeus, it was his lullaby. He learned to sleep through the clash of metal, to smile at it, even. Where other infants startled at noise, he settled instead, comforted by the assurance that the sound meant he was safe, always guarded, never alone. It is strange, isn't it? The sound that to others might bring fear was for him the very sound of love. Already, fate was teaching him what many never learn until much later, that strength and protection, even when fierce, can be gentle when offered with devotion. Before he could even walk, Zeus listened. He listened to the mountain, the rustle of wind pouring through pine branches, the trickle of streams weaving their way down hillsides, the deep and secret groaning of earth far below. These were his first lessons taught without words. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was patience. For while the great destiny of God stirred in his blood, his days passed with simple rhythms: drink, sleep, wake, observe. Growth is slow, like the carving of a riverbed, and Zeus learned to wait even before he knew what he was waiting for. One day, Amalthea led him beyond the mouth of the cave. His steps were uncertain, his legs still wobbly, but she nudged him forward with warmth and faith. The light outside nearly blinded him, so used was he to the shadows within. And oh, how the world unfolded before him. Peaks rising and falling like the backs of great beasts, trees swaying in the wind, the distant glitter of the sea at the horizon. This was his first glimpse of the world he would one day rule. But now, he was only a child marveling at light. His small fingers stretched toward the sun, curious, delighted. His laughter rang out across the slope, and the curates, hardened soldiers though they were, smiled beneath their helms at the sound. So passed the early years, hidden, yes, but never barren of wonder. Each morning a little brighter, each evening a little deeper with starlight, each day another quiet thread woven into the fabric of his destiny. And yet, even in those quiet days, reminders of danger lingered. When Zeus cried too loudly, Amalthea's ears would flick, alert. The curates would rise at once, spears in hand, pounding earth and shield in thunderous rhythm, until the cries were swallowed by their din. And far away on his throne, Cronus would shift uneasily. He had devoured 5 children and believed the threat gone, but some corner of his heart still squirmed with unease. Fear sits like a parasite, gnawing endlessly. He never knew why he felt restless. He never knew it was the sound of destiny his ears tried to catch and failed. Back in the cave, Zeus grew stronger. His cries turned to shouts of laughter, his laughter to running steps. He climbed the rocks around the cave, fell, scraped his knees, and climbed again. He was a child, yes, but one touched with the spirit of storms. Even in play, sparks of his future flickered. When he grew angry, the winds howled louder outside. When he giggled, bright shafts of sunlight seemed to pierce the clouds. Coincidence, perhaps, that those who raised him saw glimpses of what he would become. Powerful glimpses hidden amid the innocence of youth. Amalthea's gift, too, shaped him. Her milk was said to carry strength not only of body but of spirit, a divine nourishment. From it, Zeus gained vitality and resilience. She taught him gentleness, even as the Curates taught him strength, allowing the boy God to be a balance of both. In the evenings, after the clamor of the day, the cave filled with soft sounds. A distant owl calling, the whisper of pines outside, the steady breathing of the sleeping boy. One night, a star fell across the sky bright, sudden, burning. The Curates saw it and said nothing, but in their hearts they knew. Fate was speaking. This child would rise beyond all others. By the time Zeus could speak, his hidden life had carved him into something uncheckable. He did not learn in palaces filled with trainers or tutors. He did not sit on a throne as a spoiled heir. He learned from the earth itself, from hunger and satisfaction, from cries drowned by the clang of bronze, from the love of a mother who risked everything to protect him. His childhood was woven not of wealth, but of watchfulness. And in many ways, it was that hidden, humble beginning that gave him the strength to one day seize the skies. Still, he was a child, and children long for more than caves. He asked questions, why the Curates never left their posts, why he had no brothers or sisters. And the answers were hushed, vague, for how could they tell him the truth? That his siblings were swallowed whole, silenced within their father's belly, that Cronus's paranoia had stolen them. For now, Zeus was too young to bear such knowledge. Truth, like thunder, would come soon enough, but not yet. The world around him grew restless even as he thrived. Cronus's paranoia deepened. Storms of war whispered in the wind, and the earth itself, wise Gaia, watched and waited. She knew the hour would come when Zeus would no longer be a hidden boy, but a champion rising from the cave, carrying justice in storm. But for now, yes, for now his story was still gentle, still flowing slowly, like honey from a comb, still marked by soft stars and the rhythm of bronze feet. The greatest storm of Olympus was still a sleeping child, and those shadows of destiny closed in, he slept on, unbroken, protected, loved. And so we leave him here, at the end of this chapter, a boy still hidden in shadow, still unknown to the world outside. The cave is quiet, the guardians watch, Amalthea feeds him, Rhea waits with patient hope, and the thread of prophecy hums silently in the dark, a thread that will someday blaze into lightning. For every beginning, even one born in shadow, carries within it the promise of a dawn. Chapter 2 is The Awakening Destiny. The cave on Mount Ida had cradled Zeus through his infancy and sheltered him in his earliest years. But children do not remain children forever. Slowly, steadily, the hidden boy grew taller, stronger. His voice deepened bit by bit, his stride lengthened. His laughter carried more power as though the air itself leaned in to join him. Within the quiet stone walls, a transformation was unfolding, not sudden like a lightning strike, but steady like the passing of seasons. And just as the boy grew, so too did his questions. Why was he hidden? Why could he not wander beyond the mountainside to meet others like himself? Why did his guardians keep their shields always at the ready, their faces marked with unrelenting seriousness? Even Amalthea, his nurse and guide, often gave gentle but guarded answers. She would distract him with food or lead him out into the fresh air to look at the stars, avoiding the questions he was increasingly insistent upon. But young Zeus was clever, and cleverness paired with persistence is hard to contain. The world outside called to him. No bronze clash of the Curates could drown that voice forever. One evening, when the mountain air was sharp and the cave glowed faintly from the fire crackling within, Zeus sat beside Amalthea. His gaze was steady, his expression unusually firm for one so young. "Tell me," he asked, "why do the curates never stop their dance of shields? Why do you feed and guard me in secret? Why don't I have brothers and sisters?" Amalthea's eyes softened. She had nursed him, taught him, guided his first steps. She had grown to love this boy as though he were her own child. To hold back the truth forever would be to betray that love. And so, with a tremor in her voice, she began to weave for him the story he had been shielded from, the story of Cronus. She told him of the prophecy, first spoken by sky and earth, that one of Cronus's offspring would grow powerful enough to overthrow him. She told him how his father had swallowed his brothers and sisters whole at birth, each tiny cry smothered in darkness. One after another, 5 lives stolen into silence. Only by Rhea's sobbing defiance and Amalthea's own care had he been spared the same fate. The cave seemed to tremble under the weight of her words. Zeus listened, wide-eyed at first, then furious. His fists clenched, his breathing grew ragged. Storms stirred outside. The pine trees bent sharply as bursts of wind poured down from the peaks. For the first time, the power within him spilled outward, no longer dormant. A low grumble of thunder rolled across the clouds above the mountain. Amalthea hushed him quickly, laying her hands upon his shoulders. "Do not let your anger consume you now," she whispered. "Anger is a spark, and sparks must be tended wisely, or they will destroy before they create." Zeus breathed deeply, forcing calm back into his chest. But something had awakened inside him that could never return to silence. Awareness. The fragile child who had once only known play and laughter now knew sorrow and loss. He had siblings, family, yet they lived in the prison of his father's belly. He had been given freedom, but freedom alone was not enough. That night, he did not sleep easily. He lay awake within the cave, staring up at its dark ceiling, tracing the cracks like lines of a map. His mind churned with questions. How could he rescue those who were lost? How could he confront a father as cunning and powerful as Cronus? The curates stood guard outside as always, but Zeus's thoughts were more restless than their clashing shields. As dawn came, he rose with determination written across his young face. He no longer looked like a mere child. There was resolve in his jaw, lightning in his eyes. Over the days that followed, he began to prepare himself, not with weapons of bronze, but with knowledge and with inner strength. He walked the forests of Crete, listening to the wind until he understood its languages. He crouched by rivers, tracing their flowing patterns until he recognized the rhythm of water as if it were a kind of song. He gazed at storms gathering on the horizon, not running from them but welcoming them, asking in silence what secrets they held. The earth itself became his teacher. Rocks taught him patience. Fire taught him transformation. Stars taught him the vastness above, urging him toward ambition. And always Amalthea tempered him, teaching gentleness where defiance might otherwise harden into cruelty. It was during these years that his courage began to show plainly. He could face mountain wolves with little more than a stick in hand, not through recklessness, but through a steady calm that unnerved beasts. He could climb sheer cliffs, lungs pumping strongly, muscles burning, until he stood with arms wide to the clouds, as though greeting the heavens themselves. The curates, too, sharpened his strength. They taught him discipline, the rhythm of combat, the measure of balance between ferocity and control. Yet often they marveled that Zeus seemed already to know these things without being taught, as though power itself had been written into his very soul before birth. Still they knew everything he did now was only preface. The real battle lay ahead, waiting. But even as his resolve grew, so too did Cronus's paranoia far away. The Titan King never suspected the survival of this hidden child, yet the tightening unease in his chest never fully ceased. It was as if the shadow of prophecy whispered just beyond his awareness, gnawing at his confidence. His reign was mighty, he commanded gods in the very heavens, but fear makes even the strongest kings restless. He began watching Rhea more closely. He demanded greater loyalty from his followers. Yet in the recesses of Crete, he remained blind to Zeus's hidden youth. One night, when Zeus stood alone outside the cave, gazing at the arc of stars above, he felt for the first time not merely like a child of destiny, but like destiny's chosen instrument. The stars shimmered vast and steady. Time seemed to hush, the wind pausing, the trees bowing. And in that silence, Zeus understood. He had not been spared merely to survive. He had been spared to restore balance, to bring justice to a world strangled by fear. The thought filled him with a mixture both heavy and liberating. Heavy because such purpose was immense for one so young. Liberating because at last there was meaning to his secrecy, strength to his difference. He was hidden not by chance, but by design. From then on, he stopped questioning why he had been brought up in shadows. Instead, he began preparing to step into the light. His body hardened with training, his mind sharpened with questioning, his spirit tempered with both ferocity and mercy. No longer would he merely be a boy raised in a cave. He was the storm in waiting, and thus part one of his true journey began not by lifting a weapon, not by declaring war, but by awakening to who he was. In that moment, destiny ceased to be something that happened to him. Instead, it became something he would pursue. The mountain's wind swirled around him like words of encouragement. The distant sea glittered as though sending promises from afar, and Amalthea, watching from nearby, smiled faintly. She knew the turning point had arrived. The boy she had fed and sheltered was no longer just her ward. He was the one who would redefine the fate of gods themselves. From the shadows of a cave, a savior was beginning to rise. The cave of Mount Ida had carried Zeus from infancy into youth, but a cave, no matter how sacred, cannot forever contain a storm. There comes a day when the bird must leave its nest, when the sapling must grow beyond the shade. And so it was with Zeus. One early morning when the air felt sharper, clearer, and the sky above bore a pale blushing light, Zeus stepped beyond the narrow mouth of the cave, not as an infant clinging to Amalthea's side, but as a youth strong of limb, steady of gaze. The mountain welcomed him differently now. Birds circled above in patterns that felt almost ceremonial. The winds, which once only brushed his cheeks like a playful hand, swirled around him with intent, curling strands of his dark hair, whispering as if eager to test him. For the first time, Zeus walked farther than the slopes his guardians had carefully marked. The curates followed at a distance, their bronze armor catching the dawn, but Zeus hardly paid them heed. His stride was his own, his breath confident, his senses opened wide. Every sound of insect, every ripple of wind, every shift of earth underfoot spoke to him. It was not arrogance that carried him forward, but a deep thirst. The world had waited so long for him, and now he longed to know it as much as it longed for him. Down the slopes, he discovered a stream he had only ever heard from afar. He crouched beside it, dipping his hand into the cold water. It was sharper than he expected, stirring his skin alive. He drank, and the taste was purer than any milk. It seemed to sing as it passed his lips, as though the water itself recognized him. He smiled at the thought. Was it possible, truly, that even the elements already sensed his future? Later, at midday, he climbed the crags of the mountain like a born climber. His muscles burned, sweat beaded his brow, but he pressed onward with joyful ferocity. The higher he climbed, the clearer the horizon became. From one peak, he saw the endless blue sea stretched before him, shimmering under sunlight like a polished shield. In another direction, forests rolled like waves of green, deep and shadowed, stretching farther than sight. The world was vast, yet he did not feel small before it. Instead, he felt belonged. That night, he did not return to the comfort of the cave. Instead, he lay beneath the open sky for the first time, his body resting on the earth, his eyes fastened on the constellations overhead. The stars pulsed quietly, steady and endless. Some flickered faint, others shone bright. To most, stars were only distant fire, but to Zeus, lying there, they felt like signposts. He wondered if gods, too, might one day shine above the world like stars, their stories eternal. And the stars, in their silent way, seemed to nod. The curates kept their watchful distance, but even they sensed change. The boy was no longer theirs to shield entirely. He was stepping into a rhythm of power greater than they could control. They would dance, as they always had, but their role was shifting from protectors to witnesses of his becoming. Amalthea, too, watched him with both pride and sorrow. Her bond with Zeus was deeper than words. Every step he took away from the cave felt like threads loosening between them. She had cherished him, fed him, shielded him, nurtured him as gently as any mother might. Now, though, he belonged to the world. Her cornucopia might pour abundance, but even that magic could not hold him from his path. Sometimes, late at night as Zeus slept, she lowered her head and whispered, "Remember mercy, child. Remember gentleness. The world will ask much of you, storms, yes, but also calm." Zeus was not deaf to her pleas. Those storms stirred in his blood. He cherished her gentleness. He would never forget Amalthea, his nurse, his first teacher. As days turned to weeks, Zeus began testing the gift within him, though no one called it a gift outright. He raised his arms to the sky, and winds hurried faster. He struck one stone against another, and sparks leapt farther than expected, more dazzling than they should have been. Once, in anger, when a wolf threatened the mountain goats, his cry roared like thunder, shaking branches loose from nearby trees. The wolf fled in terror, never to return. Each time he wondered, was this coincidence, or was the storm within him awakening? Amalthea and the curate said little, but in their silence he guessed the truth. It was not Zeus who had chosen thunder. Thunder had chosen him. Yet even as Zeus grew into his strength, his thoughts often turned to those still imprisoned. His 5 siblings, swallowed by Cronus, remained trapped within his father's body, a horrifying truth he could not shake from his mind. He pictured them often, silent, waiting, longing to be free. That knowledge pressed heavy on his chest. How could he laugh? How could he climb cliffs? How could he marvel at the stars, knowing they remained in darkness? One afternoon, when clouds gathered thick overhead, Zeus climbed alone to a high peak at Mount Ida. Rain spattered across his skin, but he did not flinch. He lifted his arms wide as lightning stitched across the sky. "Father," he whispered, his voice trembling not with fear but fury, "one day I will come for you." The thunder that followed echoed like a promise. But Zeus, though powerful, was still young. To challenge Cronus too soon would be to fall before him. He knew he must grow wiser, stronger, patient like the river carving stone. And so he returned again and again to the natural world, making it his teacher. He learned the patience of the olive tree, which took long years to fruit but gave nourishment for centuries. He studied the sharpness of eagles, circling high above, waiting for the right moment to strike. He learned the pulling rhythm of tides, steady and sure, neither rushed nor hesitant. His guardians secretly marveled at his growth. Already, their bronze clashing felt less necessary. Already, the cave seemed too small for him. Already, his gaze pierced into distances they could not imagine. All the while, Cronus sat on his throne, still bloated from the children he had swallowed. He laughed at the idea of succession, for had he not defeated his own father, Uranus? Had he not swallowed the prophecy as easily as he had swallowed his children? His arrogance convinced him he was invincible. Yet deep within his belly stirred faint cries muted, distant like echoes in a cavern. The swallowed ones were not entirely gone, and though Cronus ignored the restless stirring, the truth was inevitable. Fate cannot be digested. In Crete, Zeus was patient but burning. He was fire under stone, growing hotter each year, and the mountain itself seemed to sense it. Storms circled more often. Winds bent trees more fiercely. Even the sea occasionally roared against the shore with greater force, as though reflecting the boy hidden in the cave. Zeus was not yet ready to rise against Cronus, but every day was a step closer. Every cry that once echoed softly in the cave had now become a vow, growing in quiet strength. The hidden child was a hidden storm. And storms, Emma, do not remain hidden forever. The world shifted, waiting. Chapter 3 is The Path to Rebellion. The cave had sheltered Zeus long enough. Years had passed since the wailing infant was first hidden in the arms of Mount Ida, and the boy had grown into a youth tall and sure-footed, with eyes like chips of the stormy sky gray, one moment brilliant the next. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with an air of inevitability, as though he knew the earth itself had written his path long before his first breath. And yet, though he grew stronger each day, his heart ached with the weight of what he knew. His 5 siblings, swallowed whole by Cronus, waited within his father's body. Their cries might not reach mortal ears, but Zeus could feel them in the quiet of his soul like faint heartbeats echoing in a distant chamber. His freedom was incomplete so long as they remained captive. But how could one youth, however gifted, overthrow a Titan king? Zeus wondered this often. He could wield storms, yes, could summon winds, could sense the power of thunder lurking just beyond his grasp. But Cronus's strength was raw, ancient, sharpened by centuries. To stride openly into his father's hall would be to embrace ruin. Zeus needed more than strength. He needed wisdom, cunning, and allies. It was then that fate sent him a companion. One star-filled evening, while Zeus wandered the slopes of Mount Ida, he paused by a grove where the wind whispered with unusual clarity. The leaves danced, though no breeze stirred, and in the stillness, a figure appeared. She was smaller than the sky-dwelling Titans, yet carried herself with a brilliance that lit the shadows. This was Metis, a goddess of sharp thought and deep cunning, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys. Zeus straightened, wary but curious. "Who are you?" he asked. She smiled, eyes keen, voice soft like running water. "I am Metis. I know the bend of rivers and the secret turns of thought. And I know who you are, child of Rhea, hidden from the gaze of Cronus." Her words startled him as though she had read his very bones. Yet instead of feeling exposed, he felt recognized, seen. "You carry a burden," Metis continued, "and the weight of destiny presses upon your shoulders. But destiny cannot be carried alone. Will you listen to me, Zeus?" And so, beneath the grove's murmuring canopy, they spoke for hours. Metis explained what Zeus had always intuited. Brute force alone cannot conquer cunning tyrants. Strategy must weave with strength. Subtlety must walk hand in hand with storm. Cronus was guarded not only by his size and might, but also by his readiness to destroy at any threat. To strike him blindly was to invite failure. "But Metis," Zeus said at last, frustration sharpening his tone, "is my family to remain trapped forever within him? Am I to wait while their cries echo endlessly?" Metis laid a gentle hand upon his arm. "Not forever, no. But patience is not weakness. Your father has fear in him, and it blinds him. Let that fear nurse him into complacency while you grow steadily. The moment will come when his own arrogance will open the door. Until then, we prepare." Thus began Zeus's education in wisdom beyond storms. Metis taught him to see the world not only with his eyes, but with his foresight. She walked with him by rivers, asking, "See how the stream winds? It might run straight, but instead it curves. Why? Because water knows its strength, it bends, only to return stronger. So too must you learn to bend, to wait, to choose the right time for straightness. She pointed to trees, tall and sturdy. The oak does not rise in a day. Its roots must first twist deep, unseen, before its branches ever touch the light. Do not scorn your hidden years, Zeus. They feed your roots. Each lesson sank deep into him, soft but weighty, teaching him patience even as his blood cried for action. Metis reminded him that even storms must gather before they break. In the meantime, all eyes beyond wisdom were forming. For though the curates had long been Zeus's guardians, they too saw they were nurturing someone fated for greater battles. They taught him discipline of body to match the quickness Metis nurtured in thought. Soon his muscles curved sharp, his stride grew long. His hands were steady whether he held dagger, spear, or nothing but air. He was learning not just to fight, but to think like one preparing to lead. Amalthea, faithful nurse, gave him still another gift, compassion. She reminded him daily that power without mercy would mirror Cronus's cruelty. Zeus sat beside her often as the horn of plenty spilled food, feeding the humble, the guardians, even wanderers who crossed into hidden Crete, unaware of who they shared bread with. Remember always, Amalthea said, a leader must feed not only bodies, but also hearts. And so, through these three Metis, the curates, Amalthea Zeus became more than a storm waiting to break. He became a storm with direction. One day, under the cover of night, Metis spoke plainly. The time will come when Cronus grows drunk on his own seeming invincibility. He believes he has swallowed prophecy, swallowed fear, swallowed your siblings. But his gut cannot silence fate forever. When that time comes, you must act swiftly. I can help you. With cunning potions and strategy, I will teach you how to make Cronus yield what he has stolen. Zeus's pulse quickened. At last the outline of hope. Perhaps his siblings were not lost forever. He agreed, and from that moment on, Metis became not just a mentor, but an accomplice. At her urging, Zeus journeyed further than ever before. He disguised himself as a wanderer, entering distant lands to test the world's pulse. He watched mortals labor in farms and villages, sensing both their fragility and their endurance. He observed the minor gods, the nymphs and spirits, learning how power could be shared rather than devoured. Wisdom, he discovered, was everywhere if one only listened, sometimes in the call of an owl at night, sometimes in the endurance of a turtle crawling day after day without wavering. He was no longer just a youth of Crete. He was a growing force, quietly knitting allies, gathering knowledge, sharpening resolve. Meanwhile, Cronus remained blind, his arrogance turned almost laughable. On his throne, he laughed with booming false confidence, convinced the prophecy had been silenced inside him. He did not know that fate itself was sipping time, pouring steadily until the hourglass tipped toward his downfall. For fate does not shout as it works, it whispers. And its whisper was in Zeus's ear, prepare. Prepare, for the moment is coming. By Zeus's hand, the swallowed ones would one day see light again. By his storm, Cronus's rule would one day crack apart. The cave was no longer his prison. The mountain was no longer his limit. Already the whole world trembled quietly, like breath held before the first strike of thunder. Zeus was no longer just a hidden child. He was destiny in the making. The nights on Mount Ida grew heavier, star-filled skies pressing low, whispering secrets into the dark. At times, Zeus would lie awake listening, uncertain whether it was merely the wind threading through the trees or fate itself bending nearer, breathing into his ear the time of purchase. His days of innocence had ended. His days of waiting were nearly over. He was no longer a child who merely marveled at streams, forests, and stars. He carried knowledge sharper than bronze. His siblings lived trapped within Cronus. His father's paranoia had desecrated family, and prophecy demanded redress. His hands, grown strong from the climb and toil of Crete, now itched not simply for discovery, but for justice. Yet, as Metis had taught him, force without cunning was no more useful than lightning striking aimlessly into the sea. To overthrow Cronus, one must do more than rage. One must plan. And so the planning began. Metis sat with Zeus one twilight beside a hidden pool, the glow of fireflies flickering across her calm face. Cronus, she explained, believes himself uncheckable because he swallowed the threat. He thinks your siblings are silent and gone. That blindness is his weakness. We shall undo him not through open battle at first, but through his own mouth. When the time is right, we will make him yield those he devoured. Her voice was firm, but her gaze was compassionate, for she knew what she asked was more than strategy. It was the reclaiming of brothers and sisters, of family stolen. Zeus clenched his fists, the starlight in his eyes sharp. Then teach me. Show me how. Metis leaned closer, lowering her tone. Through potion and trickery, I can weave a draft that will loosen the tightened stomach, tear open the prison within him. With the right moment, Cronus himself will release what he thought lost forever. But the moment must be seized, it will not return twice. Zeus absorbed every word. She spoke of herbs that grew in shadowy groves, roots that carried bitterness enough to rack even a titan's body, leaves that whispered poison through the veins. He roamed the island with her, learning not only to pluck, but to understand, to see which plant carried calm, which carried venom, which carried transformation. Knowledge of earth, Metis said, is as strong as lightning. Use both, and no tyrant withstands you. Even the curates aided his growing plan. They taught him not simply how to strike, but how to buy time, how to disguise movement, how to sense the patterns of battle before it began. Their clash of shield and spear rang out across the mountains not only to protect, but also to sharpen Zeus' ears, his instincts, his readiness. And Amalthea, though her heart ached as she watched him step into dangerous destiny, nourished him with her horn, ensuring his body never faltered. Strong you must be, she murmured often, but not cruel. Promise me that when you strike to free, not to enslave. Zeus nodded each time, and in his heart he meant it. Seasons turned. The youth of Crete became a man. His muscles carried the maturity of strength. His mind shone with the polish of wisdom. His spirit burned with compassion and resolve together. When he strode across the mountain slopes, even clouds seemed to follow, gathering in quiet reverence. The storm was no longer hiding, it was standing tall, waiting for the horizon. But how could he leave Crete? Cronus's eyes were everywhere, his paranoia deep-rooted in every corner of the earth he ruled. To stride out openly would invite ruin. It was Metis who soothed that doubt. He does not suspect. Remember, Zeus fear blinds. Cronus believes he swallowed all six. He has no thought of a youngest living still. The thought gave Zeus wry comfort. To be forgotten was his strength. To be overlooked was his shield. One dawn, as sunlight bathed the cave one last time in soft golden light, Zeus rose with new certainty. He stood before Amalthea, before the Curetes, before the loyal guardians who had shielded him since birth. His voice, low and resonant, wove through the cavern stones. My time here is done. You have given me protection, strength, and love. Without you, I would not be. But hiding was my beginning, not my end. I go now to claim what is mine, not thrones, not crowns, but family. I go to free those who suffer in my father's belly, and to bring balance to a world ruled by fear. I cannot remain a secret storm. I must become the sky itself. The Curetes bowed deeply, bronze ringing as they lowered their shields in salute. Amalthea pressed her horn to Zeus's lips as though giving a final blessing. Go, my child of thunder, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. But remember gentleness even amid justice. For storms that never calm become as cruel as tyrants. Zeus bent low, laying his forehead against her own, a gesture of gratitude. He would carry her voice forever. With Metis at his side, Zeus descended the slopes of Mount Ida, his cloak billowing in the morning wind. Each step struck against rock as though echoing through fate itself. Behind him, the cave remained, no longer his cradle, but now a monument to beginnings. The time of waiting had ended. The path toward rebellion began with whispers. Zeus traveled in secret across lands ruled by Cronus. He walked among mortals who shuddered under Titan dominion. He listened to minor gods who longed for freedom. He sowed quiet promises, laying seeds of alliance. Wherever he went, he saw the same flicker of hope in eyes tired of tyranny. No banners yet, no trumpet calls, but the wind itself seemed to carry anticipation. Something was shifting. Metis guided him always, her eyes sharp, her counsel careful. They practiced the crafting of the potion, the mixture bitter and complex, designed not to kill Cronus outright, but to unlock his belly. For death was not the goal, release was. One evening, as Zeus studied the potion's frothing surface, he asked softly, "Will it be enough?" Metis only smiled gently. "Enough? It will open doors destiny has long awaited. But Zeus, you must be ready for what follows. Releasing siblings is one task, leading them is another. Are you ready to lead not only yourself, but those who will look to you in trust?" The question weighed heavier than bronze. Zeus considered it long, fire crackling beside him. Finally, he nodded. "I must be, because I am not fighting to rule. I am fighting to return what was stolen. That is enough to lead me forward." Metis' smile deepened. "Then you will not fail." The winds shifted that night. less wild and more insistent, as though carrying the scent of something near, change. Far away, Cronus sat on his throne of stone and fire gorged on plenty, smelling neither the smoke of rebellion nor the faint stirring of storm in the distance. But even within him, deep in his belly, where the captive gods lay hidden, there was motion, a turning, a whisper, a restless stirring. For the swallowed ones had never died. They listened, they waited, and perhaps, in their deepest silence, they dreamed of their brother, yet unseen, the one who had come to free them. Zeus, walking silently under stars, carried that dream with every step. Once hidden child, now growing rebel, soon the storm that would break the world. Chapter 4 is the liberation of the gods. The day of reckoning dawned quietly. No trumpets blared, no banners unfurled. It began softly, almost humbly, with Zeus walking through mountain passes cloaked in plain robes, a wanderer's staff in his hand, Metis at his side. The world around him knew nothing of the storm hidden in his steps, the thunder forming in his chest. Cronus sat far away in his great hall, unaware. Upon his throne of black stone he feasted, drank, and laughed without restraint, surrounded by sycophants who dared not speak truth. His arrogance was a fortress as thick as iron, yet it blinded him more surely than any wall. He believed destiny had long been buried inside his belly. He believed nothing could touch him, but fate is patient, Emma, and patience has teeth. As Zeus and Metis approached Cronus's hall, the air itself seemed to tighten. The earth trembled faintly, as though sensing that centuries of silence were about to be torn apart. Metis carried with her a flask small, unassuming, yet within it swirled the potion she had crafted over long months, made of shadowed herbs, bitter roots, whispered incantations. A potion not for killing, but for revealing. At the threshold, Zeus whispered, "This is the hour." Metis nodded softly. Remember, strength is not in rage, but in resolve. Hold steady, for the world itself presses its weight into your hands tonight. The hall of Cronus stretched wide, echoing with laughter and the clink of goblets. Servants bustled, fearful and quick, while the Titan king lounged with a crown tilted carelessly on his brow. His presence was commanding, enormous, but his eyes were dulled with comfort, his thoughts drowned in arrogance. Zeus entered the hall disguised as a cupbearer, a simple servant with lowered gaze. To Cronus he looked no different than dozens of others. Cronus, half drunk with wine, barely spared him a glance. "Pour," commanded the Titan, thrusting out his goblet. Zeus bowed, hiding the fire in his eyes. He poured smoothly, wine mingling with the bitter contents of Midas's potion. The liquid swirled dark, but quickly faded to crimson, indistinguishable from the wine. Cronus lifted the goblet and drank deeply, unconcerned. To him, every sip was an affirmation of his own power. Moments later, a shift came over the Titan. At first, minor, a tightening in his throat, a strange unease in his stomach. He waved it off with a grumble, but the unease grew, rolling through him like a storm building from within. His laughter stumbled. His face contorted. He leaned forward, clutching at his midsection. The hall fell silent, goblets froze in hands. breath caught in throats. Cronus roared, but the roar was not of power, it was of agony. His mighty body heaved, convulsed. And then, in a surge as violent as it was miraculous, the first figure emerged from his throat. Gasping, brilliant Hestia, the goddess of hearth and flame, alive, her presence radiating warmth. Cronus bellowed again, falling to knees cracked with pain. Another form spilled forth, Demeter, goddess of harvest, eyes blazing with the promise of fertility and growth. A frightened hush seized the room. The impossible was happening, the Titan King was unraveling. Zeus stood tall now, letting his disguise fall away. No longer a faceless cupbearer, he was storm and fire, eyes gleaming with lightning. "Father," Zeus thundered, "your greed has kept my siblings chained in darkness, but greed cannot silence destiny. You sought to swallow fear itself, but fear does not digest. It waits, and now it rises." Cronus coughed, gurgled, staggered. Again his body convulsed. From his throat spilled Hera, proud and regal, her eyes already aflame with queenly defiance. Behind her burst Hades, dark and brooding, his presence thick with shadows. Then came Poseidon, mighty in form, his gaze like the sea itself, restless and unending. The hall erupted in chaos. Gods once silenced now stood free, shielding their eyes from the light unused for so long, but filled with power, filled with rage, filled with gratitude that freedom had finally found them. Zeus looked upon them siblings once lost, now restored. Tears pricked his eyes, though his face remained stern. "You are free," he said, voice ringing through the hall like judgment. "No longer prisoners of fear, no longer swallowed by cowardice. Stand with me, for our time has come." Cronus rolled back, gasping, weakened, stripped of his false security. Anger flared in his eyes, wild and desperate. "You," he roared at Zeus, "the sixth child, the cursed prophecy. I should have devoured you as well." He reached out, but his strength faltered. Where once he had towered, now he seemed smaller, drained by the very children he had tried to contain. The newly freed gods gathered around Zeus, trembling not with weakness, but with the sheer strangeness of their freedom. Already their power sparked faintly in the air around them, the warmth of Hestia, the fruitfulness of Demeter, the queenly flame of Hera, the darkness of Hades, the restless tide of Poseidon. Together, they were no longer victims. They were a force reborn. This moment, Emma, was the birth not only of a family restored, but of an army. Zeus turned, calling them close. "The world has suffered long under the crushing weight of fear. Now we shall rise not for crowns alone, but for balance. Cronus has ruled only by devouring. We shall rule by building. But make no mistake, siblings, the war begins today." Around them, the hall quaked. Cronus, staggering to his feet, rallied his guards, mighty titans sworn to his cause. Their shadows loomed across the walls. Bronze clanged, deep voices rose. The first beats of war trembled through the air. The freed gods gathered tighter around Zeus. They were not trained for battle, not yet hardened in war. They had lived in darkness, their limbs untested, but they had divinity in them. Fire, harvest, marriage, shadow, sail coiled now with new breath, ready to be loosed upon the world. And in the center stood Zeus, lightning flashing faintly now about his hands, no longer hidden, no longer silent. He had begun as a baby's cry echoed in a cave. Now he was storm-given flesh, the leader his siblings needed, the liberator destiny demanded. The hall stood on the brink of violence. Cronus roared, summoning titans to his side. Zeus lifted his staff high, voice slicing through the chaos. This is the hour. Rise, Olympians, children of Rhea, children of light. The age of fear ends tonight. The hall of Cronus quaked under the weight of a freedom he had never intended to lose. One moment, the Titan King was surrounded by silence and false security. The next, the air was alive with the breath of gods reborn, his own children standing defiantly before him, their power stirring like fire awakened from buried embers. Cronus snarled, furious and shaken. The prophecy he had feared from birth now stood incarnate in Zeus, the son he had failed to devour. Ungrateful whelps, he roared, voice shaking the hall like thunder. I gave you life. How dare you rise against me? Zeus stepped forward, shoulders squared, staff raised, eyes gleaming with the promise of lightning. You gave us not life, but prison. You devoured us out of fear, and fear is no kingdom. We are no longer your captives, Father. We are your end. And with those words, the first sparks of rebellion leapt like fire into dry grass. Cronus summoned his guards, loyal titans who had stood by him for ages. Their heavy steps clattered across stone, their weapons gleamed. The air thickened with their growls and thunderous shouts. The Olympians, newly freed, stood huddled together hesitant, yet burning with the raw power of gods who had known only darkness and now saw light. The clash began. It was not yet a war, but the beginning of one, the sharp edge of a battle that would echo across the cosmos. Swords met sparks, shields rang, and voices cried out, not in despair but in awakening. Zeus fought with a ferocity never before seen in so young a god. His staff cracked against shields, his fists glowed faintly with lightning, and his voice cut sharper than blades as he called to his siblings, urging them to hold strong. Poseidon raised tridents of water, conjuring waves that surged even within the stone hall. Hades cloaked the room in shadow, unnerving the titans. Hera's commanding cry rallied their spirits, while Demeter's grasp brought growth vines that strangled weapons mid-swing. And Hestia's flame burned, steady and pure, shielding them against the titans' overwhelming onslaught. Yet for every strike, the titans pressed harder. They were ancient, immense, their strength forged in the age before gods. The Olympians faltered, untrained for battle, their power bright but unshaped. The hall nearly shook apart beneath the pounding of Titan feet. Zeus realized then this was only the beginning. A single skirmish could not topple Cronus and his armies. The battle would stretch not hours, not days, but years. The whole world would become their battleground, and so it did. For 10 years, the war raged. The Titanomachi, the battle of Titan and Olympian, the clashing of ages. All who dwelled in the cosmos felt its tremors. Mountains split, seas roared, the sky cracked with storm. Rivers shifted their courses, forests bent before the fury. This was not only war, it was the shaping of a new world. Cronus's armies were vast. Titans born of the Earth's first age marched with him, towering in fury. They wielded weapons forged of stone and fire. Loyal to their king, they sought to crush this younger generation before it could root itself too deeply. Among them were titans fierce and ruthless, names spoken in dread, but Zeus would not yield. Though outnumbered and tested, he grew sharper with every clash. His voice became thunder itself, urging his siblings onward, teaching them courage. Day by day, they learned to weave their powers together, not scattered flames and storms, but united forces. Demeter's vines held enemies, while Poseidon struck with waves. Hera directed their moves as though she already were queen. Hades sowed fear, cloaking battlefields, so Titans stumbled in confusion. And Zeus, always at the front, bore the brunt of their father's wrath, lightning sparking brighter through his veins with each victory snatched from defeat. Still the war stretched long. 10 years is a lifetime in suffering, and hope trembled at times. The Olympians fought valiantly but could not fully break the Titans' power. It was then that Zeus turned to new allies locked away in Tartarus, the deep abyss at the edge of creation. Imprisoned there by Uranus long before, 3 Cyclopes dwelled, giants with a single blazing eye, creators of immense craft. Alongside them lingered the Hecatonchires, monstrous beings with 100 hands each, locked in chains. Once feared as too dangerous even for the Titans, they languished in misery. Guided by Gaia's whispers, Zeus descended into Tartarus itself. The air was suffocating, the walls of the abyss dripping with despair. Chains clattered in the dark, and groans echoed from forgotten throats. Yet Zeus did not falter. He freed the Cyclopes first, shattering their iron bonds. They blinked with their single eyes, staring at him in awe. "We know you," they rumbled, voices like grinding stone. "You are the prophecy. You are the one who shall break the old order." In gratitude, they gifted him weapons of unimaginable might. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt raw lightning shaped into a weapon no beam could withstand. To Poseidon they gave a trident, ruler of waves, breaker of earth. To Hades they gave a helmet of darkness, a helm that cloaked its wearer in shadow and fear. Then Zeus broke the chains of the Hecatonchires. Towering, fearsome, yet grateful, they pledged themselves to his cause. With 100 hands they could hurl mountains, break armies, turn the tide of war. No longer prisoners, they became the Olympians' fiercest defenders. With these allies, the balance shifted. The Titans fought with fury, their strength still formidable, but Zeus now wielded lightning itself. Bolts split skies, shattered mountains, incinerated foes where they stood. Poseidon's trident churned seas into leviathans that crashed against Titan armies. Hades, cloaked in his helmet, moved unseen, bringing terror to enemy hearts. And the 100-handed ones, oh, what terror they brought. With each hand, they hurled great boulders, crashing down upon Cronus' forces like hailstones of the earth itself. No spear line, no shield wall could resist them. Still, Cronus himself stood unbending, his power vast, his command unbroken. For 10 years he had resisted, drawing strength from his ancient dominion. But now the cracks widened. His arrogance faltered. His body, stripped of the stolen lives he had devoured, no longer carried invincible weight. The younger gods pressed harder, their thunder growing louder, their waves striking deeper, their shadows spreading farther. On the final day of that long decade, armies gathered for one last stand. The plain of Thessaly shook as Titans massed on one side, the Olympians on the other, their new allies towering above them. The air quivered with anticipation. Even the stars above seemed to halt in their courses, as if waiting for the outcome. The battle bellowed forth. Lightning carved the sky into shards. Oceans rose and crashed upon land. Fire leapt. Shadows thickened. The earth's bones groaned at the weight of it. Titans roared. Gods shouted. The thunder rolled, not the thunder of weather, but of destiny. Zeus hurled his thunderbolt, and it struck Cronus with a force unimaginable. The air split. The ground quaked. Cronus staggered, his crown tumbling from his brow. The thunderer struck again, bolt after bolt, until Kronos, the devourer, the tyrant king, collapsed beneath the weight of prophecy fulfilled. The Titans fell with him, defeated, their cries echoing hollow as they were driven down into Tartarus, bound with chains forged by the Cyclopes themselves. The Hecaton Chires stood guard at the gates, their 100 hands gripping stone and iron, ensuring the old order could never rise again. Silence spread across the world. 10 years of clamoring war ended at once. The dust settled, the skies cleared, and for the first time, peace hovered. And there stood Zeus, his siblings by his side, weapons gleaming, their breaths ragged but triumphant. From swallowed cries to armies victorious, their journey had remade the cosmos. The age of Titans had ended. The age of Olympians had begun.